Welcome back to another crochet tutorial with Cozy Rosie UK, and today I am sharing with you this crossbody bag that also features a boxed lining. This is going to really help prevent your bag from stretching too much when you're using it, and believe me, you will be using it every single day. Now the yarn that I'm using is the Knit Craft Return of the Mac, which is like a macrame cord. This one's slightly thinner than the other Return of the Mac that they have, and this is the metallic version. I couldn't resist it when I saw it, and I thought it'd be great for a summer bag. It does kind of catch the light really quite well. As you can see, it's kind of sparkling a little bit there. And the blend is an 80% cotton, 20% metallic. It is classed as a bulky weight or a chunky weight yarn. So for that reason, I'm using a 6mm crochet hook. If you don't have a macrame cord, you can double strand 2 lots of worsted weight, so size 4 cotton or an Aran weight cotton, you can double strand that. If you are going to line your bag, which I would recommend, you're going to need the finished size of the bag. You're going to need the equivalent in some cotton or any other lining you want to use. I've chosen this rather snazzy gold button to go. It's not gold, it's 100% plastic, but it's going to go with the glistening gold yarn that I have. So to sew your lining, you can of course use a sewing machine, but for me, I can't get the finished bag through my machine. I've already tried to line it with it, but we are going to have a boxed lining because we're going to have a bit of a base to this bag. So rather than just a slip-in lining, we're going to create one with a 2-inch base. So it's going to be a bit more fun than just creating your normal bag lining. And I'm going to be using this colour thread. It's as close as I've got. I'm not going to go and buy a new thread just for this. And I'm going to kind of sew it to the inside of the bag. But the actual lining itself is so easy. I'm going to take you through step by step how to create it and measure it, get it joined, and how to sew it into the bag as well. For the strap, we are simply using the same material. So the total amount of chunky weight cotton you're going to use is about 250 meters of this Return of the Mac. Now because, I've got my normal standard needle here, I don't think that's going to go through. So if you have one, grab a needle with a bigger eye so that you've got that to weave in your ends. It's a little bit challenging weaving this in, and sometimes you just have to live with the knots. We're going to make our handle out of the same yarn, and it's just going to be one big long handle that we're going to attach to the bag afterwards. If you do have a button and you want to create a button close, I'm going to show you how to add that on at the end once you've sewn in your lining. So grab your cotton, grab your hook, and let's get stitching. So the finished length of this bag is 10.5 inches wide, and it's a total of 9.5 inches tall, and we do have an extra 2 inches of the width of the base as well. So there really is an awful lot of room inside this bag, so it's really going to be your everyday favourite, most definitely. The bag is worked in joined rounds. We're going to create the base first and then create a slight rim at the bottom to work the body of the bag on top of that, and it's all done in one piece before we work our handle and sew that on. So we're going to start by making a slip knot and placing that onto our hook. And we are going to make a chain of 25. So we simply yarn over, bring our hook through, making a chain, 25 times to make our chain of 25. That's 3, 4, and 25. Once you have your chain of 25, this will not be the finished size of your base, so don't worry that it doesn't measure the full size of the base, because we're going to work around this chain to create the width of the base that we want. We're going to start by working into the second chain from hook, and I'm going to encourage you to just work underneath the top loop of your chain, because we're going to work on both sides of this chain. So we're going to insert our hook, not the first, but the second chain. And we're simply making 1 US single crochet into that chain. We're then going to work 1 single crochet into each of the next 22 stitches, which will take us all the way down to that final chain where I'm going to meet you to work the next part of round 1. Once you've worked all the way down and you've checked that you have a total of 23, including that first single crochet that we made, we're going to work into that final chain, working 3 single crochets all into that last chain. So that's number 1, work it back into that same space for number 2, and I'm rotating to work that final one, number 3, all into that same chain space, or the last chain. Now the reason that I'm rotating is because we're going to work back down all the way along into each of the other chains. So you can see this is where we've worked into our last chain, that's my end, and then we're going to work into the other side of our beginning chain, opposite where that stitch is already placed. So you can see you've almost got like a little bit of a cross, and we're going to insert our hook underneath there. So I'm going to work over my end because it does be a little bit challenging to weave in these ends. So it's easier just to work over them to hide them that way. So we're going to work 1 single crochet into each stitch across, back down to where we started, this kind of final chain there, and that's where I'm going to meet you. So once you've worked all the way down and you have that first chain remaining that we made right at the beginning, we should have a count from the first stitch we worked after those 3. So we've got 1, 2, 3, and then we should have 22 single crochets all the way down to this next last chain, where we're going to work a further 2 single crochets. So we just work 1 and 2, and then we're going to join to that first single crochet that we made just by slip stitching. So pull it through and straight through the loop on our hook. So we now have a rather long oblong. You can see that's where I've woven my end in, so I'm just going to give that a gentle tug, making sure it's buried properly. And it shouldn't be too curly, but it might curl a little, so don't worry too much. So this is now where our tail is coming out, is the wrong side. This is the right side of our project, and we're going to work the whole time with the right side facing us. So at the end of round 1, you should have a total stitch count of 50 single crochets. Going into round 2, we're going to begin by making a chain of 1. This does not count. And we're going to start by working into that same stitch that we slip stitched into, working 2 single crochets. So you can see this is where we've slip stitched, so we're just inserting back in to work single crochet number 1, and we're reinserting back into the same stitch again to work a second single crochet. We are then going to work 1 single crochet into each of the next 22 stitches. So that's 3 and 4. So it's going to take us all the way up to where we worked those 3 single crochets in our last chain from the previous round. So work 1 single crochet into each of the next 22 stitches, and I'll meet you once you've worked those. So once you've worked 1 single crochet into each of the next 22 stitches, we're going to be working 2 single crochets into each of the next 3. So we're just inserting into the next, working 1 and reinserting for number 2. And then we're repeating that for a second time, working 1 and reinserting for number 2. And then for a third time, we're reinserting for number 1 and number 2. So we've increased by working 2 single crochets into each of those 3 stitches. We're then going to work all the way back down, working 1 single crochet into each of the next 22 stitches, which will take us back to all the way down here. So we'll have just 2 stitches remaining. I've worked 1 single crochet into each of the next 22, and it almost looks like I have 3 stitches remaining, but this is my actual slip stitch join, and I can tell because there's nothing underneath it. So what we're going to do is, working into these next 2 stitches, we're working 2 single crochets into each of the next 2. So that's 1 and 2 into that stitch, and a further 1 and 2 into the next. We've got the slip stitch, the chain 1, and we're joining to the top of that first stitch that we made. See if I can make that slip stitch a bit smaller this time. There we go. So at the end of round 2, you should have 56 single crochets all the way around. Let's go into round 3. We're beginning with a chain 1 and we're going to work 2 single crochets into the same stitch as our chain 1, so just where we slip stitched. So we work number 1 and reinsert into the same stitch for number 2. We're also going to work 2 single crochets into our next stitch, so that's 1, and reinsert for number 2. We're then going to work 1 single crochet into each of the next 22 stitches once again. So continue on working 1 single crochet into each of the next 22 stitches, and I'll meet you there for the next part of round 3. Once you've worked down, working 1 single crochet into each of the next 22 stitches, we are then going to work 2 single crochets into each of the next 6 stitches. So we're going to work single crochet number 1 and reinsert for number 2 6 times. So that was number 1. Into the next stitch, we're working number 1, reinsert for number 2. That was for the second time. Repeat that, working 2 single crochets for the third time, and again for number 4. Into the next one, we're doing that again for number 5. That's number 1 and number 2. And then finally, for a final time, we're going to repeat 2 single crochets into the same. And that was number 6. And it just helps keep the shape of the base, and of course increases very evenly around that. We are then going to work 1 single crochet into each of the next 22 stitches, and then I'm going to meet you to work our final increases for round 3. So once you've worked 1 single crochet into each of the next 22, you should have 4 stitches remaining. So we're going to work 2 single crochets into each of the next 4 stitches. So we're working 1 and then reinserting for number 2 4 times. So that was number 1. So there's number 1 and number 2 for the third time, number 1 and number 2 for the third time, and then for the final time, number 1 and number 2. So at the end, oh goodness, look at that curl. Oh, give that a stretch out. There we are. So at the end of round 3, we are then of course going to skip our slip stitch, our chain 1, and join to our first stitch of the round. And then we should have a stitch count of 68 single crochets for the end of round 3. Now this is our completed base of our bag. So this is going to be flat for the base of our bag, and we are now going to work so that we leave the bag with a nice, really neat ridge that almost makes our bag stand up a little bit straighter. So for round 4, we begin with a chain of 1, and we are going to work into the back loop of our stitch all the way around, beginning with this first one that we've joined. Always a little bit tricky. So you can see where we've made our slip stitch. God, it's tiny. Is that right? Yeah. So we have our stitches are made up of a front loop and a back loop, and we're going to work into just the back loop. Now our first one is going to be a little bit tricky because we have already slip stitched there. So you just kind of aim for the middle of the stitch and just pick up the back loop and work a single crochet. And here's the next stitch. So instead of going under, we're going almost through the middle to pick up just that back loop, and we're going to leave the front loop unworked. Now we're not working any increases. We're just working 1 single crochet into the back loop of each stitch around, all the way around back to here. So we're just going to continue to work 1 single crochet into the back loop of each stitch around, and I will meet you at the end. And I'll meet you once you've worked your way around so that we can join and continue on to round 5. Just working into my final stitch, and you should be looking a little bit like this, that you've got a ridge just after the stitches that you've worked. And we're going to join to that first single crochet that we made. There's the slip stitch, chain 1, here's our stitch, and we're just going to slip stitch to join as normal. Wow, It's not supposed to be this curly. I think my tension's a bit off today. Effectively, what we have done is we are going to, because we are now not increasing, as we continue working up, our bag is going to start to stand, and we've been left with this lovely ridge. That unworked front loop is created that lovely ridge along the base of our bag. So for rounds 5 to 7, we are going to be making a chain of 1 and simply working 1 single crochet into each stitch around. So that's rounds 5, 6 and 7. So we're doing this 3 times. When we get to the end, obviously, we are going to join with a slip stitch, and then we start with our chain 1. So make sure that you're continuing with your stitch count of 68 single crochets, and you still have that, and work these 3 rounds of single crochets, and I will meet you at the end of round 7, ready to go on and work round 8. I've just worked my final stitch of round 7, and I'm just joining with my slip stitch, and mine's a little bit curly, but that's okay. It's just a bit of a tension thing with me. So as you can see, you've now got the start of your bag body, and it's from round 8 that we're going to start that textured section of this pattern. So we begin round 8 by making a chain of 3, and that counts as our first double crochet of the round, which means that we don't work into that stitch at the bottom of our chain 3. Instead, we are going to yarn over and work 1 double crochet into each stitch around. So we're skipping where we've joined, we're going into the next. Once we've yarned over, we yarn over again, bring up a 3rd loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. Don't worry about that space, we are going to fill that with the next round. So we're yarning over, working into the next stitch, working another US double crochet, and we're simply going to work 1 double crochet into each stitch around. So once you've worked 1 double crochet into each stitch around, we're going to join to the top of our 3rd chain. Just by inserting our hook, I kind of push through the middle of that top chain and then slip stitch join. So for round 9, we make our chain of 1, and we're going to work back into the same place that we joined, and this time we're working 1 single crochet into each stitch around. So we should still have our stitch count of 68 single crochets at the end of round 9, and then round 10 we are going to start our texture. Just joining my final stitch of round 9, and now we get to do the fun bit. We're going to be adding this texture throughout round 10. So we're going to start round 10 with a chain of 3. Now this counts as our first double crochet, and we are then going to work our first front raised treble crochet. So this is a US treble. So we're going to wrap the yarn around the hook first, and we're going to work 2 rows down. So this is our single crochet row for row 9. So we're working around the posts of the double crochets that we made all the way back in round 8. So once you've yarned around the hook twice, you're going to insert the hook around the post from the front out the front, because it's a front raised treble. So once you've double wrapped, this one counts as our first stitch, so we're going for the stitch underneath the next. We're inserting our hook around the post of the double crochet 2 rows below. Once we've inserted our hook, we're going to yarn over and just bring our hook back through. We'll have 4 loops on our hook. We yarn over, pull through 2. We have 3 loops remaining, so we yarn over, pull through the next 2, and then yarn over to pull through the last 2. And that creates our front raised treble, and it creates an awful lot of texture as well. So you can see that when our hook is straight, it actually blocks the stitch above the post that we worked. So this stitch here covers that stitch, so we're going to actually work into the next one. When you're working, it is possible that you pull your hook away and this stitch becomes exposed, but just be careful because that post that we've just worked counts for that stitch. So we're going to skip that stitch behind the post and work a double crochet into the next. So it look a little bit like that. From behind, you'll see it looks like you skipped a stitch before the one you've worked, but that front raised treble counts as that skipped stitch. So let's work the next one together. We wrap the yarn around the hook twice. We've worked into this stitch, which counts for this post here. So this is the next stitch to work, and if we come down 2 rows, this is our next post to work around. So we go in and come back out from the front. We yarn over, bring our hook through, pull through 2, pull through 2, and pull through 2. So we're going to have a space in between these ribbed stitches where we work that double crochet. So this stitch is covered by that post, so we're working a double crochet into the next. If you look at the back, again, it looks like we've skipped a stitch, but that's where our post is. So we wrap the yarn around the hook twice. This stitch counts for that one. See where the raised one is? Skip that post. We're working around the next post, working that raised treble crochet. There's my dog snoring for a change. And then we work a double crochet into the next. See how if I pull that away, that stitch becomes exposed. So you're essentially skipping that one, working your double crochet into the next. If you were to hold it properly, it looks like you've got a raised, no raised, raised, no raised, raised. We're just going to repeat this all the way around, and I'm going to meet you once you've worked your last, well, you've got 1 stitch remaining. Oh, make sure you work around the post. And we're just going to, oh, I didn't double wrap. You see, this is so easy. So continue to repeat this around, working 1 raised front treble, 1 front raised treble, yep, gosh, it's quite a number of words for it, followed by a double crochet in the next. Repeat that around, and I'll meet you as you approach the end of this round. So once you've worked those lovely front raised treble crochets all the way around, you should finish working a front post treble around the last post, and then we're going to join to the top of our chain 3 with a slip stitch. You should have a total of 34 front raised trebles and 34 double crochets at the end of round 10. For round 11, we're simply going to repeat round 9, working a chain of 1 and then working 1 single crochet into the same as our chain 1. Oh, I missed half the thing there. So 1 single crochet into the same as our chain 1 and into the top of each stitch around. So at the end of round 11, we are going to slip stitch to the top of that first single crochet that we made, and you can really start to see the formation of our bag shape. I do love how we've got this extra space because of this wide base as well. Going into round 12, we're going to start with a chain of 2. Now this chain 2 does not count as a stitch, and we're actually going to go straight into working our front raised treble, but this time we're working it around that chain 3 2 rounds below. So we start by wrapping our yarn around the hook twice, and we're going around the post of that chain 3 from 2 rows below, working our raised treble once again, and then we're going to be working a double crochet into the next. So you can see that that's in front of that stitch, and we're going to work a double crochet on top of the raised treble from 2 rows below. Well, we're just into the next stitch. So very similar to the previous time, but this time we're working around the post of the double crochets in between the front raised trebles of row 10. Making sure that we've just skipped 1 stitch. We are then working our double crochet into the top of the next stitch. We're going to repeat this all the way around, alternating, working our front raised trebles around the post of the double crochet 2 rows below before working a double crochet into the next. So continue around, and this time you will end on working a double crochet, but I'm going to show you where to join when we get to that end of the round. So continue around and I'll meet you at the end. So I'm just working my final double crochet of round 12, and we started with a chain 2 that doesn't count. So we're going to join to the top of that first front raised treble crochet that we made, and that joins our round. I lay mine flat to her. There we are. I just love this texture. I just think it looks absolutely beautiful. So at the end of round 12, you should still have 34 front post raised trebles, and you should have 34 double crochets working in between. And then for rounds 13 to 16, we are going to make a chain of 1 and simply work 1 single crochet into each stitch around. And then for round 17 up to round 25, we're going to repeat rounds 8 to 16. You can use the timestamps in the description box below to work through those additional rounds. So let's do a bit of a transition. And it should look, wasn't that magic? And it should look a little bit like this. So you should have 2 sections of your ribbing with a block of single crochets worked all the way as well. So this is quite a hefty bag, and you can feel, that it's quite weighty as well. And what I'm going to do now is fasten off and add on at least a nice long tail, because we do need to weave this in quite well. So I've just made a chain 1. I'm just going to tighten that off, and then I'm going to reattach in the middle to create a small chain, because I want to attach my button about there for a very small closure on this bag. So I'm going to make sure I've got it upside down, and with it folded, I'm just going to find the middle stitch and check the number of stitches either side is about central. It's so hard to tell, isn't it? So I think that one, hang on one second. Might need to shift it over 1. I'm going to move over 1. We've got an even number, so it's a bit hard to tell, but I'm just going to rejoin in roughly the middle stitch. I think that's going to be absolutely fine. Can't get much more central, and remember the handles are going to fill out that space. Oh no, I'm doing this the wrong way. So I'm just going to drape a tail of the yarn over, leaving enough to weave, and I'm simply going to make a small chain that's going to be a loop long enough to go around my button at the height I want it. This is entirely optional. I don't want to be overly tight, because obviously I want to be able to fill my bag. So I've made a chain of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. I made a chain of 14, and I'm simply going to just flip it back over and then slip stitch back into the same stitch that I joined. So slip stitch to that loop there, make sure that's nice and tight. And then again, I'm going to fasten off with a nice long tail, pull that through, and then we have a button loop that is going to reach over and sit over a button in the middle. I just need to sew my button on. So that's that bit done. The reason I wanted to do this before we do the lining is because, of course, I'm going to have to bury these ends and weave them in. So bring that end through. I'm just going to tie these 2 together so that they are nice and secure. And then I can weave the ends in so that we will have, once they're woven in, a nice button close. Now that we've made a little button loop We need to weave these ends in and then we can make our handles. Our handle is very, very simple. It is worked in one long chain so that it reduces the amount of stretch, because if you were to work the short rows, like just do 6 and then do it all the way up, it will stretch a lot more than it would if you were to work one long chain. So we're going to start with a very long tail, and the reason we're starting with a long tail is we can use that to sew our handle on. So that is my tail. That is a good kind of maybe even 18 inches long, because I'm going to use that tail to attach my bag, to attach my handle to my bag. We're going to start by making a very long chain, a chain of 90. So we're going to make a chain of 90 and work back into that. So make your chain of 90 or however long you would like your crossbody strap to be, and then I'll meet you for the rest of row 1. Actually added an extra few chains on, so I've ended up with a chain of 100, just those 10 extra just to give me a little bit more. I don't want it too tight. So I would normally say to work under your top loop, but we're actually going to flip our chain over and work into the back bumps of our chain, because this will give our handle a really nice edge. So beginning in that second chain from hook, so from the front, there's number 1, there's number 2. If I turn it over, you can see there's a bump at the back, and we're just going to insert our hook underneath just that top bump and work a single crochet. And as you move across, you'll find the back bump of the next chain, and we're simply working 1 single crochet into each chain across, but we're working into our back bump so that we get left with the same look at the top and the bottom of our chain. You don't have to do this, and it is going to make it ever so slightly stretchier, but it won't be overly stretchy because it never stretches that much going that way, but from our height it always gets looser. So continue across, working 1 single crochet into the back bump of your chain, and I will meet you at the end of row 1 of your handle. So you should end up with 1 stitch count less than you had your beginning chain, because you worked into that second chain from hook. Oh, and I've actually not worked into the last one. That doesn't help. I've not worked into the last, so there we go, that's my last one. It does take a few moments longer to work your chain in this way, but it's just so pretty. For the remainder of your handle, we are simply going to work rows 2 to 4, because that will mean that we get to have another tail on the other side of the handle. And we are working a turning chain of 1 and simply working 1 single crochet into each stitch across, and repeating that for rows 3 and 4. And at the end of row 4, you should be back at this end, and we are going to fasten off with a long tail again, and that way we can use that tail to sew in or sew on to our bag. So continue on working rows 2 to 4, working a turning chain of 1 and then working 1 single crochet into the same as your chain 1 and each stitch across, and keep that same stitch count you had at the end of row 1, which for me was 99 stitches. And then I'll meet you once you've finished your handle, and make sure you fasten off with a long tail. We can get those handles sewn on, ready to create our lining. I have just finished row 3, and I think that is strong enough and thick enough for my strap. Plus, I don't think I have enough yarn left to make a 4th row. So I'm actually going to fasten off after my 3rd row. So I'm just going to again leave a reasonable tail. We can use both tails to sew this on, and I'm going to make sure that my handle is nice and stretched out to get rid of some of this curling. It just makes such a difference, just giving it a stretch out. So once you've completed your handle, whether you've got tails on both ends or not, I can kind of cheat because I still have a tail from where I fastened off. we are going to, oh my goodness, let me get myself a bit of room. Definitely need our darning needle with a nice big hole. And it's up to you whether you attach your handles on the inside or if you want to put them on the outside. I'm going to put mine on the inside. So if you have some stitch markers, it's worth kind of pinning your bag handle where you want it, because obviously you want this in line with the base of your bag. So I'm just going to secure that at least on one side for a moment, and then secure it to the other edge. Just means that as we're sewing it into place, we can check the positioning. And I would recommend you sew on your handle before put your lining in. Obviously we need to make sure that our handle is in no way twisted when we're pinning in the other end. And I'm just going to go down a couple of stitches into the bag, making sure that that is level with the base of the bag, so that this is the corner of the base. I'm just kind of following it up and matching up that next edge. So if, like me, you leave your ends till the very end, you may have done yourself a favour, because I'm going to use this to sew in the other side of my handle. And I'm just checking that that is kind of almost perfectly mirrored on either edge, and I've got the same amount on the inside of my handle too. So all that's left to do is to grab your needle and then sew on your handles. I think sewing them onto the inside is going to give you the neatest look, and you can simply, so I've got this on now, so let's bring that through. Is that going to lay flat? No, we're going to come through this side first of all. And I'm simply going to just work through one side of the handle and going back through the other way. And I'm going to work my way down, working backwards and forwards through both the handle and the bag. And no one will actually see if you just go this backwards and forwards motion. No one will really see where you've attached it, but by doing those double layer of kind of stitches, you're going to make it extra secure. Just repeat that until you're quite happy that your handle is secure. And of course you can then remove your stitch markers and repeat it for the other side of the handle. And then we are going to do the exciting bit of lining our bags, and we'll be covering our inside of our handle up with our bag lining. In the top right hand corner you'll find a link to my video tutorial to complete the lining for this bag. It does use a box lining and it is super easy and not as difficult as it sounds. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you over in the next video.